Hello, agus fáilte. Is mis Marc Calhoun. Hami an show anju, I bring muyoin mo leor or Beehive Dwellings of the Hebrides. Hello and welcome. I'm Marc Calhoun. I'm here to talk a little bit about my new book, Beehive Dwellings of the Hebrides, which was published by FACLAN this summer. It's the story of my 20 years of visiting and documenting over 100 Hebridean beehive cells before they disappear forever.
My interest in these cells began in the early 90s, after a visit to this 7th century monastic site on the island of Skellig Vihil in Ireland. Due to the Star Wars movies, these cells have been seen by millions. The term beehive comes from their obvious resemblance to a hive, and has caused some confusion. When I tell people the title of the book, most jump to the conclusion that it's about bees. And for years, my mother-in-law actually thought I was writing about bees. Insects do make guest appearances in the book, as anyone searching for cells must be prepared to be attacked by thirsty midges. In Gaelic, these cells are called boths, from which we get the word bothy. This particular both is one of the best examples. It is in Gary Ascleet, 5 kilometers south of Kinlochroke on Lewis. Simply stated, these structures are stone igloos. There were 4 beautifully intact cells in this settlement, and the arrow points to another one on the horizon. Many of these cells were built by early hunter-gatherers. Then, starting in the 6th century, more complex cells started to be built for monastic uses. Later on, cells were used as summer sheilings, a use that continued into the 1800s. There was a story that they drew lots at some shealing sites to see who would get to use the older, more weatherproof beehives instead of the newer shealing huts. As this example shows, most surviving cells have lost their original turf covering. Even without their turf covering, many of these cells are still weatherproof today. I've often sheltered in one as a storm passed through. The stones did keep out the wind and rain, but not the midges. Speaking of midges, if you decide to seek out these cells, you need to be prepared for the worst. In the space of a minute, these vermin can turn a delightful moorland campsite into the pit of hell. The best precautions are good campsite placement, a net, and strong repellent. In a sense, midges are the true defenders of the beehives. Only those who really appreciate these historic structures and do them no harm will hike through dark clouds of midges to search for cells. Hebridean cells range in size from 3 to 6 meters in diameter at the base, with an interior height of 1.5 to 3 meters. The most impressive feature is their dome, built by a corbelling technique, where each layer of stone gradually gets smaller until meeting at the top. The top could be covered by a single slab of stone or a piece of turf that could be removed to let smoke out and to let light in. As this plan drawing from the 1850s shows, there would be 1 or 2 entrances, a fire spot, and a built-up area for sleeping. There would usually be several cupboards built into the walls for storing food, as this photo of the inside of Boha Grishamal shows. This cell has an unusual feature that you can see at the top of the photo, a window opening. It allowed the cell dwellers to look out across the neighboring glen. As you can see, I found an old whiskey bottle in the cell. Unfortunately, it was empty. Those of you who've read my books, both of you out there, know that I always take a can or 2 of beer on my hikes. I enjoyed one in this cell, which is one of the most intact in the Hebrides. This is a cell with its turf cover intact. The turf helped to stabilize the structure and was an excellent form of camouflage. There are only a handful of Hebridean cells with their turf coverings in place. This cell on St. Kilda is one of the best examples. This cell is in Ri Ascua on Lewis, and was one of many that had their turf covering removed on purpose. It was uncovered by surveyors in 1900 to examine the structure and take photos. They did not take the time to put the turf back on, and today the backside of this cell has collapsed. Those same archaeologists also made intriguing drawings of several intact cells that have since collapsed. This example is from the 1850s, a double cell at Toy Duastal, 4 kilometers north of Kinloch Resort. The surveyors found 3 women residents who were using it as a shealing. The surveyors, who couldn't speak Gaelic, left this description of the encounter. The cell was double of the usual beehive shape, with the dwelling and dairy attached, and green with growing turf. A doorway, easily closed with a straw mat, led to the boudoir within. Close to the door was the fire, the smoke escaping through a hole in the dome. In the circular wall were 3 niches containing drying cheeses. A low interior door led from the dwelling to the dairy, which was 6 feet square. The occupants were 3 young women, dressed in printed cotton gowns, and, being Sunday, they had finished their toilet to the burn to good purpose. Some 8 of us packed into the hut, while frothed milk was handed about. Sadly, this is the same site today. Only the foundations of the cells remain. At the left is a more recent shieling hut, built from stones taken from the cells. For 20 years I've been fascinated by these lonely, isolated structures. I always expected to wake up one day to discover someone had written a book about them, but no one ever did. After realizing these cells are an endangered species, I decided to document them as best I could before they collapsed further. A record that I hope will be as useful in the future as the drawings those surveyors made 100 years ago. As this map shows, the book covers cells from Isla, the Garvilax, and the small isles in the south, to Lewis and Rona in the far north. It records the current state of all the cells I've been able to locate in those areas over the past 20 years. I did find one spectacular source of information on the cells. In 2016, I came across an unpublished thesis done in 1996 by Elspeth Logan of Lewis. She surveyed many of the cells in the Uig area, and this drawing is one example of her work. Elspeth studied 33 sites and has allowed me to use some of her drawings and descriptions in the book. The book also describes the journeys made to find these cells, including multi-day treks into the remoter parts of Lewis and sea voyages to the inner and outer isles. My love of hiking and boating dovetailed into this project, and I include maps of those journeys that you can use to find the cells. This slide is one example. It shows 2 journeys made to find a cell high on the slopes of South Lee, which rises above the inland sea of Lokiport. The first journey, indicated by a blue dashed line, was made totally on foot. On that 2-day hike, I missed finding the cell by 100 meters. I returned a few months later by boat, which cut out 8 kilometers of bog hopping. That route is shown in black. On that second journey, I found the cell, which is in one of the most stunning locations in the Hebrides, overlooking the mouth of Lokiport on the east coast of North Uist. This now and then comparison, and several that follow, illustrate the endangered status of the cells and why I wanted to write the book. This photo is of a triple cell, 4 kilometers south of Kinloch Roke, as it was in 2018. The inset shows how it looked in the 1930s. As you can see, only the central cell remains intact. This now and then is of a cell in Gary Corrigerad, a shieling site with a half a dozen cells. This one was intact in 1904, but as you can see, it has collapsed. This is a site in North Harris, near the Eagle Observatory. The cell on the left is still intact today, while the one on the right is a lot more tumbled than it was in 1860. The pointy shape of the dome in the drawing shows that you can't always trust the accuracy of these old sketches. This now and then is of a double cell at Clairvic on the Lewis-Harris border, 3 kilometers south of Kinloch Resort. I took the upper photo in 1998. I returned 20 years later, and as shown by the arrows, the dome of the smaller cell had collapsed since my last visit. Inset is a close-up view of the collapsed dome. It was sad to see. I want to end with uplifting photos of some stunning cells. This one, with its garden of sea pinks, is on Ilanfir Coher, a tiny low-lying island at the mouth of Loch Roke. There were once 3 or 4 cells on the island. This is the only survivor. The others possibly destroyed by a rogue wave. Here we cross the ocean to the Flannans, 30 kilometers west of Lewis. This cell is most likely monastic, possibly 7th or 8th century. It has 3 chambers. One is a lobby of sorts, whose entrance you can see in the foreground. The lobby is connected to a central oratory, whose dome, before it collapsed, was 2 meters high. The oratory is in turn connected to a smaller cell, possibly used as living quarters. This is that same cell seen from below. As you can see, the cell has quite a few residents these days. A highlight of a visit to the Flannans is the massive number of puffins that nest there in the summer. This monastic cell is on the island of Rona, 70 kilometers north of the Vita Lewis. From the outside, it looks like most other cells, but much of it is hidden below ground. When you crawl through its low door, all is revealed. You find yourself in a large oratory, 4 meters high. If you do crawl in, be careful. Spitting fulmars like to pray by the altar. If you do spend a summer night here, you won't get much sleep, as the walls of the cell and dozens of other nearby ruins are home to hundreds of petrels. I want to end with a positive development. This cell is at Knockdhu on Lewis, 4 kilometers from the Callanish Stone Circle. Of all the Hebridean cells, it is the easiest to visit, as it lies just 200 meters from the road. This drawing shows what it looked like in the 1930s. The cell was later knocked down because people were worried that children playing in the dilapidated structure could be injured by falling stone. But its story has a happy ending. The cell was beautifully restored by James Crawford of Lewis, who has performed many archaeological surveys in the Western Isles. The cell had been highly documented, which allowed him to return it to its original state. The cell is in a ritual landscape, and if you look closely at the photo, you can see the Callanish 4 stone circle on the horizon at the left. With its turf covering again intact, this cell should survive for centuries. If only more cells could see such love. My fascination for these elegant structures continues, and the search goes on to find more. For example, this is a site I hope to visit before I'm too old to bog hop and battle midges. It lies in the mountainous interior of North Harris, about as remote as it gets. The aerial photo hints that there may be several cells patiently waiting to be admired before they collapse.
I hope I've whetted your appetite to learn more about this endangered species, a bit of Hebridean heritage that has been woefully ignored. My contact information and other stories of island journeys can be found on my website, marccalhoun.blogspot.com. And to purchase the book, see ACAR's website, acarbooks.com. Tapal of Ersona Clunchi, Bianaclif.